this one.
You can minimize that participants if you'd like, if you don't want to.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we'll keep it up and
Thanks a little bit to make sure.
all right. Sweet. So I met Tyler Tyson. Is that your name? Sweet. How long have you been in the business? Okay. Awesome. And what made you decide to get into real estate?
I don't know. I've always been interested in it. My uncle's a broker.
Okay. Awesome. Very cool. Well, it's fun. So have you guys been to like most of these Ignite trainings? You two. And then we have Catherine and David online. Is that right?
Yep. How's it going?
Cool. You must be David. You don't sound quite like a Catherine to me.
Yeah, you'd be correct. Very
Let's see, I
astute.
look this way. So David, what about you? How long have you been in the business? What made you decide to get in it?
I've been in for like 2.5 months and decided to get into it for learning more about the real estate market in general. I was interested in real estate investing, and I knew that being an agent would help me know more about the market and potentially make more income to try to get money for investment properties.
Awesome. I have a very similar interest, or at least similar reasons for why I got into it as well. So I'll talk about that in a second, but awesome. Very, very good. And then Catherine, what about you?
I've been in real estate for about a month and a half, and then I got into real estate just so I could provide money for my family and just because I love real estate and love walking through homes.
Sweet. Well, it is fun. And it doesn't get old, no matter how many homes you go through. So that's awesome. Well, welcome. Did I miss anybody online? Has anybody joined since I last saw the little thing? Okay, sweet. Well, I'll introduce myself a little bit if that's okay, to kind of get you guys familiar with who I am and why I'm here teaching. So I grew up in Orem. After my mission, I did summer sales for 7 years, and that's kind of my sales background. I learned that I loved sales, but there was something missing for me. I wasn't feeling very fulfilled as far as what I was selling. I was doing direct TV subscriptions, and so I was saving most people money from what they were paying before, but it wasn't really that meaningful to me. So I had always been wanting something that was a little more meaningful. And I had a friend named Stan Larimer. I don't know if you guys know him. He's literally one of the greatest solo agents here at Keller Williams. In fact, of all of Utah County, he's won a bunch of awards and he's super awesome. But about 5 years ago, my wife, who felt like this was something that I should do, I reached out to him and went to lunch with him a couple times, and he was a great mentor for me and helped me get started in the business. And I decided to jump in full time. And I was telling Tyler, right? No, Tyson and Tyler, right? I was telling Tyler at the beginning that my first transaction came from my uncle, who was doing me a favor, and it was for 1.5%, but I split that with Stan because he was at that time, it was set up differently, but basically he was my mentor. And it was a single family home in Orem built in the 70s. And 5 years ago that sold for $320,000 or so, right? Pretty different from what we're experiencing now. Needless to say, my commission that I actually received after paying Keller Williams and Stan and all that, I walked away with like $1,500 for my first deal, right? And I got my license in January, and that closed in April. So my first 4 months, you could say I made $1,500. I didn't do the math, but it was probably somewhere around 50 cents an hour that I had been working, if you calculated it that way, right? Not great. I had initially planned not to go and do one more summer of summer sales. But obviously come April, I had made nothing essentially. My wife and I decided to do one more summer to just get us going. And then when we came back, we had a little bit of a savings that kind of gave me a little bit of a cushion for a few months to get things going. And then I came back in September, started working full time again. And in October, closed my first next deal. And things have been picking up since then, and it's been awesome. So I've been doing real estate officially now for 4.5 years, and I love it. It's got its ups and downs, as any job does, but the ups are really good and really fun. And kind of going back to that meaningful piece that I mentioned about summer sales that I didn't feel, I started to realize that real estate is extremely meaningful. I mean, it's hard to find anything that will change someone's life more than where they live and where they, the neighbors that they have, the friends that they'll make, the grocery stores that they shop at. I mean, everything in your life changes based on where you live. And so it's extremely meaningful. And then there's the investing piece that David talked about a little bit that I'd also been intrigued about in real estate investing, but I had nobody in my life that knew about that or that had really invested in real estate. So I didn't know who to go to. And I figured the best way for me to learn how to invest in real estate is to become an agent, to help other people invest in real estate and to witness and see how they're doing it and how they make things happen so that I can eventually do that for myself. And so that's kind of a bit about my journey. And you guys just walked in, so I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself. And if anybody's online that has jumped in since we started, I'll give you a quick chance to introduce yourself. I know you guys have probably all introduced yourselves to each other a million times, but just to get a better feel for the environment that we're working with, I'd like to do that. So what is your name?
My name is Cash Shepard. I just finished my first full month in real estate. So
Sweet.
yeah.
Congrats.
Is there anything else we were supposed to say, or is that
Just where are you from?
Fairview?
Fairview? Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
So-
Awesome. Well, welcome. So Cash.
Jesse Loper.
Jesse, I actually remember
Yeah.
speaking with you a few weeks ago before this whole
Yep.
Ignite thing started, right?
Yep.
Cool.
What else do you want to know?
Where are you from?
I live in Lehigh currently. Grew up in Northern California,
Nice.
but been in Utah 20 years. Worked at Vivint for a long time, and now jumping into real estate just recently.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome. Anybody else online that has not introduced themselves that would like to? Okay. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and get started with today's class. Today, we're going to be talking about making and receiving offers. It's probably one of the funnest parts of the job, right? So that's why this one's going to be great. We're going to talk about how to help your buyers set themselves apart from all the other competition that's out there. And then after that, we're going to talk about as a listing agent, when you're receiving offers, how do you help navigate that process with your sellers to be the most in the most efficient way possible. So, and then we're going to go through an actual real estate purchase contract, the REPC, on the MLS and kind of go through and I'll talk you through some of the things that I've done and some of the things that my clients have done to set themselves apart while making an offer. So hopefully that will be helpful. Let's see if we can get to it. Okay, so this is kind of today's agenda. Can I have somebody read this quote right here? Tyson, you've got the mic next to you. Do you mind reading that?
Some of the best agents I know love nothing more than a difficult negotiation that gives them a chance to really shine, to acknowledge objections, to discover a solution with which both sides can be happy.
Okay, perfect. How do you feel like this applies to offers and making offers?
Negotiations. I mean, that's what offers are. It's formal negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. How many people, and I'm not talking agents, I'm talking potential clients and people like other people, would you guess feel comfortable making negotiations? Do you think it's the majority or do you think it's less than the majority?
I feel like this is a trick question, so I'm going to say less than the majority.
It's not a trick question. That's what I feel. I don't have like any data or anything against that, but no, I feel like it is less than the majority. People aren't always very comfortable in that position. And that's part of the reason why they hire agents. Everyone hires an agent for different reasons and they have different priorities, right? But I found that a lot of them, whether they kind of say it or not, I learned throughout the process that a lot of them are hiring agents because they aren't so comfortable working and navigating through negotiations. The other part to it is, in most cases, I would say some investors aren't as emotionally involved, because they're just strictly looking at numbers, and it doesn't matter to them as much where they live and the size of the living room and the beautiful, fireplace that they have in the home, that kind of thing. But for the most part, when you're working with buyers that are planning to live in the home for their family, can that be an emotional process for them? Absolutely. It probably should be, right? This is a big deal. This is exciting for them. So how can that sometimes get in the way for them when it comes to negotiations? Or can it? Their emotions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, their emotions get in the way all the time. Anytime you're negotiating something that you have an emotional connection to, you want it, right? So it might make you think differently about it. You might make decisions based on your emotions. And yeah, I mean, negotiations most of the time is emotional driven.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyson, go ahead. Tyler, sorry. Thank you for correcting me. I'll pass that over to him.
Well, just for like example, then one of the deals I'm doing right now that we should be signing on hopefully today or Monday. Then the lady who's selling it, it was her husband's dental office who passed away last year. And so just like signing all the papers and kind of just going through the process has been super difficult for her.
Yeah.
And we've had to be super patient on our side, the buyer side, just letting her get ready and feel comfortable to finally now sign everything, with it being like about 2 months of getting through all this. But for her, it's been super difficult and emotional just because of
Yeah.
that.
I can imagine. And that's a really good point. It's not always positive emotions and excitement that gets in the way. Sometimes it can be these negative emotions, and, it's not always they're not always selling because they want to. Sometimes it's a divorce or, different things that can lead to a sale or a purchase that isn't always good. So our role as agents, is it emotional for us? It can be, right? I would say that for me, and maybe you guys can relate to this, at the very beginning of my career when I was strapped and, every deal meant a big deal for my income. And it still does. It can be very easy to get emotionally involved myself, right? Like, I want this to close so bad because that means that on June 21st, then I get paid this much money. And then that means that, my family's going to be good for another few weeks or whatever the case may be, right? It can be very easy for us to get emotionally involved. Our job as agents, though, is to not only not get emotionally involved, but also to help our clients see the non-emotional side of things, right? I'm going to ask that one more time. Why would it not be a good idea for us to be emotionally involved in a transaction? Would that change anything? Does that mess anything up? Yeah. Yeah. Jesse, right? Yep. And I see it time and time again. For those online, Jesse was just saying that emotions can get in the way, and that it shouldn't be an emotional thing for us. I've seen it a lot where, because so-and-so is so emotionally involved, that they will not accept this offer because it's $500 less than what they were asking for. And, here they are 30 days on the market and their home is selling for $800,000 or whatever it is. Right. And they're bickering over $500. I think there's a lot more emotion involved in those cases than logic, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense that they would give up that much for things like that. So you'll see those kinds of things, if you haven't already, all the time. And that's part of our job, is to help them navigate. I understand that you're frustrated. I understand that, that what the other party did wasn't the greatest thing for them to do, but I want to help you keep your perspective on what this means. Is if we do cancel, then your whole family is going to be in this home for another 6 months or another few months that you're already, feeling like you guys aren't very comfortable because you need a bigger house and things like that, right? So yeah, it's our job to not be emotionally involved. I'm big on people over profits. I have a little tagline for my business called relationship over transaction, which just to me means that our relationship mine between my clients is going to be, I want it to be a long-term thing. I don't want it to just be a one-time transaction. And I've found that one of the best ways to maintain that is to treat every transaction non-emotionally. Because if I'm emotionally involved, what advice might I give a client that probably shouldn't buy a certain house? Maybe I would say that they should, right? Like, because I want that money quicker, because I'm emotionally invested. So it's important for us to take a step back. And that's one of the most important things that's often overlooked that we as agents do, is help regulate the emotions and help them not feel those emotions. So if you find yourself being emotionally tied up in a deal, I would say use that as a trigger to be like, okay, I need to take a step back. What's really going on? Let me look at the big picture. Don't think of myself. Don't think of my income or my emotions. Why would my client feel this way? How can I help them proceed or cancel if they need to, or whatever the situation calls for? All right, so we're talking about making an offer, and if I can get this to work, there are three potential, I guess I'm not going to show this yet. There are three potential outcomes when you guys submit an offer. If you've already submitted an offer, maybe you know them. What are the three potential outcomes that a seller can respond with when you write an offer for your client to buy a house?
Accept, reject, and counteroffer.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Accept, reject, or counteroffer. So we're going to walk through each one. Now, this isn't always linear, meaning once you get to a certain point, it doesn't always just stop right there. Sometimes it kind of circulates a little bit, especially obviously with counteroffer. Your buyer makes an offer, the seller responds with a counteroffer, which means that you've got some more negotiating to do, and it kind of starts back over with you making another offer, or the sellers kind of essentially made you an offer. And so that's one way. Obviously, accepting, that's obvious. They accepted your offer just how it is, or they reject your offer. What do we do when we get an offer rejected as a buyer's agent? Do we just say, okay, client, sorry, we got to walk away. Let's look for the next deal? What do you think, Tyler? You want to use that mic just for the people online?
I would say maybe when that listing agent contacts you, you could even ask them what they're looking for and what you could do for similar houses, if that's what their range is.
Okay.
And then kind of just sit your buyers down and be like, yeah, we didn't get this house, but let's keep our hopes up and just stay positive and keep going out there.
So you try and get some information from them as far as what the offer accepted looked like, so that you can help your buyer maybe for the next house. I think that's great. That's a great thing to take away from it. Anything else? Do you think it's over at that point for sure? I think it depends, right?
You could probably send in another offer.
What's that, David?
You could probably send in another offer if they haven't selected someone else's offer already.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on the situation, right? If they had 30 offers and yours was rejected for that purpose, I don't know that we have much of a shot to continue trying if they've already rejected it. But if they don't, and they just rejected it, most sellers, if they get one offer that they don't like, will at least counter offer it, right? Most of the time, but that doesn't always happen. And so, yeah, I would say you could potentially write a new offer, maybe higher your price a little bit, or pay for some of the closing costs, or whatever you need to do. Yeah. And you could ask the listing agent why they rejected it. Will every listing agent tell you? They won't. But I find that the more questions you guys ask, the more information you're going to get. And that can totally be helpful for you later. And we'll talk about that more in a second. All right. So you guys are familiar with the offer process. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So now let's talk about preparing the offer. So these are some of the things that you should do. And I would advise you, at least at the start, to have some sort of a checklist that you go off of, whether it's one that's pre-made for you or you guys can make your own checklist of things that you do every single time until it becomes a habit, until it's just second nature for you to do. Because especially when you start working with multiple clients at the same time, it can get hard to remember, did I call the listing agent for this one? Did I talk to their lender? Do I have a pre-approval letter? Do I have all these things? Unless you've got a checklist that you're easily being able to keep up to date. So that's my advice. And I'll put a plug in for Trello. If you guys have probably heard of it, because I know we use that sometimes here. I use Trello myself for my own business. I have a list of checklist items that I do for every single client, every single time. That's 100 plus items from start to finish. And so I'd advise you guys to do some sort of thing the same, because again, it's just going to get too hard to remember what you did for who. And as you start to forget things, you don't do as well in your job, right? Like this. And it saves you so much time and energy, because you don't have to sit there and try and think and try and remember, did I do this for this person or not? You can just look at your checklist. Nope, I didn't. Okay, I'll send them text now, whatever it is. So one of those checklist things that I would recommend is to prepare an offer. These are some great things to do. The first one, ensure the property is still available. That's the first thing that I always do, especially in today's market. Client sends me a home. Hey, I'd love to check this out. I respond with, great, let me contact the listing agent and see what I can find out. So I'll contact the listing agent. I've got you guys know, I'm all about saving. I'm all about systems and saving time. I have a in your phones. I'm sure every smart phone can do it. I have an iPhone, so I know we can do keyboard shortcuts to where my methodology is to use one of the first words that I use in the overall message that I'm trying to send, and then abbreviate that word, but then add an extra letter. For example, my text says, hey, agent name, I have, and that's literally what my text says. So then I just double click the agent name and put in the actual agent name, right? Hey, agent name, I have a client interested in your property on address. Is that still available? And then I have my name and Keller Williams right below it. And because it's interested, I put INTT, because I'll never type two T's after int. But anyway, so as soon as I put INTT, that whole thing pops up, and then I can just fill in the name and boom, it's done. So to me, it saves me a ton of time. I do that for a lot of different things, because we're going to ask the same questions all the time. So that's the first question I ask. Is it still available? That's obviously important. I don't think we need to spend much more time on that, but yeah, it's good to know. Second, build rapport with the listing agent. Why can that be helpful?
If they want to talk to you because you're likable and you seem happy to be there, they're more likely to give you information that could help you with your buyer and making a good offer.
Okay, yeah, that could totally happen. I've had that happen before. And sorry, Cash, what were you saying? Sorry, Tyson, you're behind that mic over.
I was just saying that if you have good rapport with the listing agent, it's probably going to reflect how they present your offer to their client.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Is every single agent an awesome, stellar agent?
absolutely.
Absolutely. At Keller Williams, but outside of Keller Williams, no, I'm just kidding. But it's true. Like there's goods and bads and everything in between, right? And I've had plenty of experiences where things did not go well, and I know it was the other agent that was causing a lot of the drama. And guess what? I have this mental checklist this mental blacklist of agents that if there's ever a situation where they're on the selling side, I'm on the buying, or vice versa, I either have to be extremely careful with that, or altogether I can advise my client, hey, I've had experience with this agent before. It did not go very well. Maybe take that for what it's worth, right? And they may end up choosing another offer because of that. So you want to have good relationships with agents all around. I will also say that there's, you guys know the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the agents produce 80% of the business. And so you are going to come across these agents more than one time. I've had that happen plenty of times, where it's like third, fourth time I'm offering on a home that they're the listing agent for, right? So you don't want to burn your bridges with other agents. As hard as that can be sometimes when they're just making things really, really difficult, you want to try and keep the peace as much as possible. And so building rapport with the agent can definitely make a difference. Obviously, if they get an offer for $500,000 cash that's closing tomorrow versus your offer for $300,000 that's closing in 6 months, I don't care how much rapport you have, you're probably not going to get that offer, right? So there's other things that you have to do and your client has to do to set yourself apart, but this can absolutely be one of those things. So you want to start it off right. Okay. Some of these questions that you're going to ask the listing agent, again, we talked about a second ago, they won't always tell you all the information. Why not? If you ask them, for example, what has the activity been like on the home? And they say, they don't give you an answer, or they say they can't answer. Why not?
Like it could be because the seller asked them or didn't give them permission to share any of the details about it.
Exactly. 100%. Tyler?
Maybe though they're probably thinking if I tell these guys that, oh, there hasn't really been anyone coming to look at the home, and
Yeah.
that as me as a buyer's agent, then I may be thinking, well, is there something wrong with it? Or we can come in with a lower offer. And that's not something that the listing agent would want.
Yeah, exactly. They could give away information that may be harmful to their sellers. So I want to say this carefully because I don't want to come across as like shady in any way, but I would advise you guys to ask all of these questions every time, because whether their seller has given them permission or not, a lot of agents will tell you some of these things, right? And that can absolutely help you in negotiations. If you can find out a few key pieces because you asked questions and the next agent that's also offering on it did not ask those questions, you can make your offer more attractive to the seller. Yeah, so some of these are up here, but yeah, one of them is like inquire about the activity. So how's the activity been on the home? I would ask like, why are the sellers moving? I think that's one of these on here. Because here's the real deal is most of the time they're going to tell you something like they need a bigger home or something. I don't know. They're going to give you some vague answer that's not really specific, but sometimes they will give you a very specific, they have to move out of state and they've got to be out by June 1st and they're trying to buy this other home. And if they don't get that other home, then I don't know what they're going to do. Obviously they're in a very specific situation that's going to be tough for them and they need to accept an offer quickly. If you know that the seller needs to accept an offer quickly, let's say it's been on the market for 10 days and the seller is just totally in a bind, and you know that, why is that helpful for you as a buyer's agent? Does that change anything about how you offer or how you advise your client to offer? Okay. Yeah, so the deadlines would matter. You'd have to change those deadlines to what they need. That's true. What about price? Does it affect it at all? Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely lower the price a bit more often and get away with that. If they're in a situation where they could sell, but they don't really want to, or they don't really need to, and it just depends on if they get the right price for it, then they'll sell. If not, they'll keep it as a rental or something like that. And then you may not be able to be as flexible on your price. But if you know that the sellers just need to sell really quickly, depending on the situation, you can usually get them to accept a price that's a little bit lower than what they were wanting, right? So that's helpful to know, but you're not going to find that out unless you ask the questions. So let's read through some of these. And so we have inquire about the activity, inquire about other offers on the property. You guys know that on the MLS, you can see the history of if they've accepted offers, if it went under contract and then it's back on market again, things like that. You always want to ask why. Again, most agents are going to tell you the buyer failed because of financing or the buyer just decided against it. But sometimes they'll tell you something about the property that the buyer found out. Buyer found out that there was mold and they didn't want to deal with it. So, okay, now you know that there's mold in the property. You can make your offer accordingly. Ask questions about the seller's motivations. That's kind of what I mentioned a minute ago. Why is the seller selling? Ask the listing agent how they want to receive the offer. That one's, I would say we don't really need to do so much. It's usually by email, but check the agent notes in the MLS. That's where you're going to find it. If you're wanting to build rapport, you got to do things the way they're asking you to do them. One of the easiest ways to not build rapport is please send your offers to this email, and then you send it to a different one, and then you call them and say, hey, didn't you get my offer? And they're like, no, where did you send it? And it's to the wrong one because you didn't read the instructions. Like that's not starting off on the right foot. So make sure to read the agent remarks. Oftentimes you're going to find it in those places, how they want you to receive the offers. Sometimes they'll have you go to a website and submit a form attaching your offer and things like that. So you definitely want to make sure you are following those guidelines. Obtain the buyer's pre-approval letter from the lender. I'm going to say that if you have not obtained it yet, and you're at this point, you're already making an offer, that's not good for you. I'll tell you about a situation, and I've had a lot of learning experiences for myself. I'll tell you about one why my whole mentality is I pay for my education one time, and I'm not gonna make that mistake again. Early on in my career, I had a cousin who was wanting to buy a house. She and her husband, they were about my age, so at that time 27, 28, something like that. And she had her own business, and she appeared to be very successful. And then he had a really good construction job that I felt like was great. They were looking for a house for $600,000 in Salt Lake area. And so I was like, great. Thanks for reaching out to me. Let's go to work. I ended up showing 22 homes up in the Salt Lake area. So for me, living down here, it was a bit of a commute. I spent a lot of hours until they finally found the home that they liked and wanted to put an offer in on. And that's when I said, okay, great. Now can we get a pre-approval letter for you? Okay, look, I haven't talked to a lender yet. Oh, okay, no problem. Go talk to a lender, and then we'll get the offer together. They talked to the lender. Guess how much they qualified for? $400,000. Lots of problems happened after that. Number one, they couldn't make an offer on the home they wanted to, right? And I found out that a big reason why that happened was because in her business, although she had been very successful, she had 1,000 write-offs that basically showed that she had no income. And so they were just going off the husband. So you never know. Even if their business seems to be super successful, that doesn't mean that their taxes are set up in the right in a way for them to show enough income to afford a house, right? Even though they could monthly afford it, but the bank's not going to let them. Anyway, so that was one problem. They couldn't get the house. So we started seeing homes after that, $400,000 range. Guess how they felt about those homes? Every single one. It was a downgrade, right? And that's a big difference. So they were discouraged after that. They didn't want to buy a house. And yeah, they ended up moving back into her parents' basement for like 3 years. And they finally just got a house like 6 months ago. And yeah, they finally can qualify for a $600,000 house. But the house that they're getting is like the identical house that we saw back when it was $400,000, right? So it is a big mess. So my rule of thumb that I learned from that I took away, that I absolutely want to ingrain in your minds, is I'm okay to show a client one house without a pre-approval letter, because sometimes that's how you meet them. Sometimes it's like, that's how you get the ball rolling. Like, yeah, let's go check out a house. That's fine. But I will never show them a second time unless they have a pre-approval letter. And I'll explain that to them if they need it. Most buyers will be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's the next step in the process. Once you get a pre-approval letter, that's your golden ticket to where we can go see homes and make offers. If they need a better explanation than that, then I explain exactly what I just told you and I share my story. You guys may not have that same story. I hope you don't. If you do, you can use your own. Otherwise, use mine and say, I know an agent that this happened to them, right? So that you can help your clients. Because it wasn't good for me as an agent. We wasted a ton of time. I didn't end up getting it paid for that transaction because it didn't happen. There wasn't one. I feel like if we had done it the right way the first time, they probably would have found something and been able to move on. So that's my spiel for getting your pre-approval letters before you start showing homes. All right, next, review the MLS and tax records on the homes that you're thinking of making an offer on. Produce a comparative market analysis. CMA, why would that be helpful at this point? Yeah, okay. Let's say the home is worth $400,000. No, let's say the home is worth $400,000. That's what your CMA is telling you that you just did your homework on, but it's listed for $325,000. Why is it helpful to know? How's that going to change your offer? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Because if they don't, then who's going to do that? The next guy's going to do that because their agent's telling him proper advice. Somebody's going to get that home for what it's worth. That's just kind of how it works, right? And so if you're offering 335, you're like, oh, we're offering 10 grand over. So one thing I tell my clients in my, yeah, it's great point. Yeah, maybe the agent does know. So in those cases, if I see the price is way lower, I'll straight up ask the agent, the listing agent, if they are aware of any problems with the home, to try and at least get something. And most agents will be honest because eventually you're going to go to the house anyway and find them out for yourself. So they may as well tell you right then that the whole home needs to be, the electrical work needs to be redone completely or whatever the case is. But yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes it's because the home isn't actually worth that and it's not something you know yet. But if it is, and there isn't a problem with it, maybe the agent just gave them bad advice and they're not so familiar with the market. That does happen. Maybe $75,000 low is maybe a bit of an extreme example, but it's happened and it will continue to happen, especially with the market changing as quickly as it does and the home prices that continue to rise. Sometimes they're looking at old comps that a few months ago that maybe that was the right price a few months ago, but today it should be worth more. So what I'm saying is if you don't do that homework and find that out for your client, someone else will, and you're not going to get it because you're not going to be in the ballpark of what the home could go for. Let's do the opposite. Let's say that the home is listed for 400,000, but you do your CMA and say that the home is really only worth 325. How does that change the offer? Could you offer 400,000 and probably get the house? Maybe. Is that the right thing for your client? I can't say. Probably not, but maybe there's a situation where they just don't care how much it is and they just absolutely want that house. Maybe in a situation like that, that'd be okay, but at least you're letting your client know, hey, I found out that this is what it's worth. With that though, I will say to be careful because you don't want to tell your client, hey, this house is really only worth 515, not 525. When you're that close, it's probably not a big deal because the market changes and within a month they're going to recover what they were down on. And you don't want to not get sales because you're telling them to offer $5,000 less than what it's actually worth, or what you think it's actually worth at that time, right? So I would say that that's more helpful when it's like a more extreme difference, but it's really a crucial part of you helping your client decide on price. And that's what sets you guys apart from them just going out and buying a home on their own. Is a big piece of that is to know you guys have access to information, access to sales that have happened in the neighborhood that they don't have that information on, and you guys can help them make that decision. So I tell my clients, I don't do a CMA for every single property they're ever interested in going to see, but I will do a CMA for them on every property that they want to make an offer on or they're considering making an offer on. Just because it does take a few minutes, right? It's not like a 1-minute thing to find a CMA. If you do it right, it's going to take you at least 5 or 10 minutes. So you don't want to be doing that on every single house they ever send you, just on the ones that after you've gone to see it, they feel confident they at least want you to take that next step. And then lastly, obtain a seller's disclosure statement and other needed documents. Oftentimes sellers will have their seller's disclosures on the MLS in an attached form. You guys can probably picture this in your minds when you go to the MLS and at the bottom, there's an orange bar that says schedule showing, right? If there are no attached documents, that orange bar will go from left to the right of the screen, like it'll cover the whole thing. If there are attachments though, that orange bar is like half on the left side and there's a green bar on the right side that says attached documents. You can click on that and there may be some documents that the seller's agent has uploaded for you. And one of those oftentimes is the seller's disclosures. So you can click on that, read through it, see what the seller knows about the property. And if there are any major defects, so that even before you go to check out the house, you can tell your client, hey, it looks like they've had these types of issues. You guys said that, you know, you wouldn't be interested in a home that has those types of issues. Maybe we don't need to check it out, right? And let them decide. Any questions about how to prepare? Like these are mostly about talking to the listing agent, but any questions about this or any ahas or comments? Okay. Just like with anything in life, to do it right, it's going to take a little more time. And this is one of those examples. You've got to make that call. You've got to call the listing agent, but trust me, it's going to pay off. It's going to pay off. So, all right. So we've talked about the offer process and the outcomes that could happen. We've talked about now preparing the offer. Now we're going to talk about writing the offer. And then we'll take a break after this. Oops. All right. These are all the things that your client is deciding in how they write their offer. Starting from obviously the purchase price, the other terms, the earnest money amount, seller's disclosures, conveyances, due diligence, inspection period, time for seller acceptance, financing terms, buyer pre-approval letter, closing date, home warranty, repair limits, special clauses, and addendums. I thought it was addenda. Maybe it's addendums. Anybody know? Anyway, whatever it is. So with all of these things, how much of this could you know before they even write an offer for any house? Is there anything you could know that your client wants, how your client wants to set up their offers? Maybe let's just, oh, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So when they do find a particular property that they're interested, you find that the CMA comes out to be higher than what the home is being sold for or listed for. Yeah, no, exactly. And you could find out maybe what are some of the repairs that they recommend or that they know need to be done to the home. And again, most agents will tell you straight up what that is. If they say, oh, I don't think there really needs to be any, and then we go to the house and see it, it's probably because the agent maybe didn't even go to the house, which does happen before they sell it. But I'm talking more also like, let's say that today you meet with your client, you haven't even seen any homes yet. Is there any of this information you can know that ahead of time before you write any offers that you already know what's going to be? Can you know the price that they're going to offer on a particular home? You can know what they're qualified for, right? But you don't know exactly what price they're willing to pay for a particular home until you find the home and then they offer, right? What about, so that one was a trick question. So I finally got you. Earnest money. Yeah. You can know at least what they can afford. You can know their financing, how much of a down payment they're planning to give. Once in a while, you'll find a situation where that could be different, where if they've got a ton of cash, but they don't necessarily want to, then that might be different from property to property. But most clients say, this is the loan I'm getting. This is the amount of down payment I'm going to give. So you can have that on there. Pre-approval letter. Obviously, we just talked about that. You should have this before you see homes. So some of these things you'll know. Cash. Yeah, the repair limits. Yeah, special clauses. It could be that they need extra time or they can't close by a certain day. They have to close after a certain day, things like that. So yeah, some of these things you can find out. And I would say if you can, the more you can, the better, because then when your client is interested in the house, you don't send them a list of 10 items. Okay, let me know what you want for purchase price and earnest money and this and that, and just go on and give them a ton of homework. You should already know some of these things, as much of them as you can, before you get to that point. Then when they're interested and say, okay, this is the house we want to make an offer on, then there's only a limited amount of things that you need to ask them to do, to give you. So we are going to jump into a real life purchase contract that I'm sure all of you have seen, and we'll go through it. Does that sound helpful? Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with how to get there, go to utahrealestate.com. There's the new Sky Slopes forms, which is awesome. I highly recommend start using that. But for our purpose and demonstration, it will be easier for us to use this. So you go to Forms Library, and then you type in what you're looking for. So we're going to do REPC Look down for right here, real estate purchase contract, add that. I'm going to also add an addendum. Catherine, David, how are you guys still doing?
Doing great. How about you?
Great. Have you guys talked about buyer broker agreements already and gone through one of those?
I know we all work on those a little bit in our case studies, so we're all at least a little bit familiar with them.
Okay. Would you like me to go over one of those as well? Oftentimes, this is when we get it signed. Okay. All right.
By the way, sorry if I talk over anyone else because I can't really hear if anyone else is talking.
No, you're totally fine. Yeah. Okay. Well, this one's actually URE Legacy Forms Library. This is like the older version that I've been used to for 4 years. SkySlope, let me click on that. It'll take us to a new window. This is SkySlope is awesome. It's brand new. It's only been out for a month or two. So these are some of the clients I've uploaded on here for myself, but you create a new file. Cool thing is you tell who it is. So if I'm representing a buyer, you click on buyer, you put in their name. If you know what property they're offering on, you can click import MLS data. It'll have you put in the MLS number, and then it'll auto populate a lot of this stuff, the address, the agent name, the agent license number, all that stuff that's just takes some time to go through. So then you click create, and it'll also auto populate most of their signature and initial boxes for you. So you don't even have to put those on there. It's really, really nice. Pretty cool. You can still use DocuSign. I don't know for how long. I think eventually they'll get us all on here for everyone, but yeah, it's really cool. It saves you a lot of time. It's pretty self-explanatory. I didn't take any training or classes on this, but it's pretty easy to use. Yeah, you put in the you put in the MLS number. Once you click import MLS, you put in the number right here, and it'll auto populate most of that information. Yeah, exactly. Once they know what property they're getting, then that's when I'll come in here. But then also you can click on this, and let's say that my client Taylor, the last name is Taylor, we didn't end up getting this one. So then the next time she offers, I'm going to click on here and click duplicate, and then just change the address or the MLS number for the next property. And then like all her information is going to be the same. And so it'll automatically be there. And like the earnest money amount is going to be there, and the, all that stuff. So it saves you a lot of time. It's really, really helpful. So I'd recommend using that, but the formatting's a little bit different. And so this is just going to be easier for us to go over on here. So now you have a client. You got to the point where you did your buyer's presentation with them. They decided to work with you. Great. You found out what kind of homes they're looking for. You set them up on the MLS. They're getting their automated hot sheet alerts, the listing alerts. They find a home they're interested in. You go check it out, and they say, great, we love this home. This is the one. Let's write an offer. Here you are. Okay, great. You can ask them a few questions at that point, as far as what missing information you have. Like, do you know what purchase price you want? They may want you to do a CMA for them so that you can better advise them. You could ask them what earnest amount would you like? And one question I ask now that's probably the most important, along with those that we never used to have to ask, is at what point will you feel comfortable having your earnest money become non-refundable? Because it used to be that it was kind of like standard where today we go under contract, a week from now the seller's disclosures are due, 2 weeks from now due diligence period is over, and that's when our earnest money becomes non-refundable except for financing purposes. 3 weeks from now is the financing and appraisal deadline, and 4 weeks from now we close. Does that sound like how we're doing offers today? No, it's very different. Maybe 4 weeks for closing is still pretty acceptable. Seller's disclosures, however, well, because of due diligence is usually, both from writing offers myself and from seeing offers come in on listings I have, usually less than a week now is the due diligence period. It's pretty short. Oftentimes it's 2 or 3 days, depending on how popular the home is. So if that's the case, then obviously the seller's disclosures are going to need to be before that so that your buyers can know what the sellers know about the property and make any adjustments if they need to. But that's usually when I have their earnest money become non-refundables after the due diligence deadline. Dean will tell you it's not wise and it's hardly ever needed to completely waive the due diligence period. You give up a lot of rights as a buyer if you waive the due diligence period. I would much rather have even a 24-hour due diligence period than to waive it altogether. For a seller, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference in their overall decision. But for your client, it can make a huge difference. Because then if you're waiving the due diligence period, you're also telling them that you don't need to do a home inspection. You don't even need to go into the house. The seller's not obligated in any way to let you in the house until you close after that point. So some sellers still will because they don't know that or they are kind, but you don't want to put your client in a position where the fate of, being able to see the home lies in the hands of the sellers because you may get burned. So anyway, don't waive it if you can ever avoid it, the due diligence period. All right, so here we go. On this, I'm just going to fill this out. That may make it real. So this is how I do things. Every agent may do things differently. This is how I do it. Today's the date. We're making an offer for my buyer. I'm just going to call him Joe. And you go to what I'll do is I'll open up a new tab. I'm just going to make up a number. I know we're in the 180s. I have no idea what this listing is, but let's find out. One match. Awesome. Beautiful house in Roosevelt. And it's still active for sale. This is perfect. Okay, great. So I'll have the MLS of the home that we're offering on pulled up in a screen next to it. I'll go like, I'm not going to do that right now because I don't know if I don't want to mess this up, but I have it split screen on my thing. So on the left side, I see the offer. On the right side, I see the home because that way I can copy and paste a lot easier. And I'm going to turn my thing because I'm getting my mouse backwards. Okay. So then we'll put in the seller's name. What do you guys put for that? You know how to find it? If you scroll down here, the owner is usually going to be listed right here. Oftentimes that'll be either blank or it'll say owner on record or something like that. So then you can go up to the tax ID right here and you can click on it. It'll open up a new page and you can see who the owner is on this page. So in this case, it's a business. MRC Homes is the owner. So I would just copy and paste that because again, it gives that listing agent a little more, hey, this agent knows what he's doing. Because if they didn't give you the seller's name, but you found out anyway, like they know you did your homework, they know you know what you're doing. So I like to put that. But you could also just put owner of record, and I'll do that pretty often too, which just means whoever the owner is, we will clarify their name in an addendum later on. So that's what I'll do. Then earnest money. You've already talked to your client, or maybe now's the time you send them a text. You definitely want to make sure your clients are aware of what earnest money is. I actually made a little video of what earnest money is, how it's deposited, and the whole process that I just send to my clients. Again, I'm all about systems. So I made one video that now I can just send to my clients every single time. And it's of me. So that way it builds rapport for me as an agent too. You guys can do the exact same thing. But it'll save you a lot of time. But basically, you want to explain to them, whether it's through a video like that or over the phone, that their earnest money is due. If the sellers accept your offer, the earnest money is due within 4 calendar days. So we need to have you deposit that within 4 days. Some people will have plenty of money, but it's in some separate account that takes a week to access. And so you want to make sure that they have this amount available within 4 days. If the amount is above $10,000, and I'm telling you guys this, you guys will know whether or not your client's offering more than $10,000, then it has to be a cashier's check. It can't be a personal check written to Keller Williams Westfield Real Estate. So you put in the earnest money amount, and then I just put in the form of check. It doesn't really matter whether it's a cashier's check or personal check. So that's why I always just write check. Okay, let's say that they're going to do $5,000. And if you guys have questions, stop me as I'm going. Okay, so the address. You look at this sheet right here. I copy this, go back, paste. And then I know off the top of my head it's in Roosevelt. If I had both of my hands, I would do all of this, but I'm not going to do all this. County. Sometimes I honestly don't know what county it's in. If it's in Utah or Salt Lake County, that's easy. But outside of that, I'm like, okay, what county is this in? So sometimes I have to actually Google it. Actually, is there a way to find it out here? Thank you. Hey, there you go. Saves us a step. Where did you see that? Oh, right here. Top left. Okay, sweet. So you can get the county from there, put in the zip code, and then the tax ID number is that same number that we clicked on to see the owner information. So you copy that, paste it into here. All good so far? Yeah. Did he say that? If Dean said it, I would do it. I've never done it. I didn't know that was a thing. So right here. Okay. Cool. I will start doing that. Thank you. I missed that meeting. Gotcha. Yeah, that could make sense. If you put in the MLS number, then they're kind of have to be abided by the whatever they have on here. That could be true. Probably especially helpful with commission, BAC. But awesome. Thanks for that. All right. So everything up here is self-explanatory. 1.1, this one's helpful because you'll see this all the time. Let me see if this one just happens to have something. You want to become familiar with what's automatically included with the house. According to the contract, there are certain things that come with the house anyway. And yes, we found it. On this listing, they say that they're including the range. So does that mean that you have to put that right here in other and write range? Yes? It's a trick question. I got you again. The answer is no. Because if you look in included items 1.1, it lists out 1,000 things that are automatically included with the house. And if you look right here, already the range is included with the house, unless you specify otherwise by saying it's excluded. So you'll see that some of the most common ones are ceiling fans. That one's in here too, somewhere. TV mounts, that's included in there. Window coverings, blinds, shutters, all that stuff comes with the house. So you don't need to, it's just redundant to say that. If you put it on here, if you put range, it's not like you're going to be messing anybody up, but you don't need to. I think the only times that it might be wise to do it is to just make sure that the sellers absolutely know that the range is included. So maybe it's still wise to do that, but there's some things you don't need to put on there. But if that's the case, usually in this market, you just look at what's included and you put that. If you're asking for the washer and dryer and they said that they're excluded, like in this case, your chances of getting that offer go down. So just be wise. That's part of your job as an agent, is to figure out, does this home have a lot of offers? Am I the only offer? If I'm the only offer, I might be able to get away with a little more for my client. Otherwise, we just kind of get what they are giving. Okay. And there's usually not going to be additional items of personal property the buyer is going to acquire. If there is, there's a separate addendum for that, which we'll talk about. So then you look at the excluded items. Maybe they are not including. This is another one of the same things. This home doesn't have this listing, but sometimes they'll say excluded washer dryer. Well, the washer and dryer was not included anyway, so you don't have to write that as excluded. The refrigerator is not included unless you check this box anyway, so you don't have to write that as excluded. Does that make sense? So it's just redundant. All right. And then if there's any water rights or things like that, generally in Utah County, personally, I've never had anything with water rights. If you're working outside of Utah County, then you might. Maybe in Fairview, maybe they'll have more water right stuff that you have to put on here. Okay, there you go. So you got to disclose that or put that on there. All right, then we get to the purchase price. This number, I don't know what the house was listed for, so we're just going to say 400,000. We're offering 400,000. This number and this number are always going to be exactly the same. They should be. If not, then there's a discrepancy because you're saying the total price is 400,000 and the total price is 400,000. But if that's different, then you're doing something wrong. All of these numbers should add up to 400,000 in some way. So earnest money deposit, what do we have for that? $5,000. Let's say my client is doing a 5% loan, 5% down payment. So then you just calculate 400,000 times 5%. Is anyone going to beat me? Nope, 20 grand. All right. Should have done that in my head. But in my mind, I know that my client has 20 grand total to put towards the down payment. That includes the earnest money, which goes towards it. So in this case, I'm just going to say it's 15 grand because 15 plus 5 is 20. And there's their down payment, which means the remainder, which would be 380,000, would be for the new loan. 380,000. So again, double check your math. 5,000 plus 380 plus 1,500 or 15,000 equals 400,000. So I know I did it right. If there's a discrepancy here, you want to make sure to fix it. Okay, is the buyer's ability? Oh, go ahead, Tyler. Mm-hmm. No, so a good question. So if you're offering above the list price, let's say they listed it for 400, but your client wants to do 425, you just state that right here. You say, I'm offering 425. This is my offer. And 425 right here. And then you're going to adjust your loan here to be, well, if we're buying this home for 425, then my loan's going to be, I don't know. I'm not doing the math right now, but what's that? Not 405. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, good question. So yeah, I tell my clients that the list price is more of an advertised price, or it's more of a ballpark price most of the time, but it's not that every time they get that price, it's usually going to be higher or lower. It's not even half of the time they get that price. So, okay, right here, this is where you disclose if your buyer needs to sell their home first in order to buy their home. Now, I want you guys to be careful, because what happens if you put yes, and there's 1,000 offers on this property? Where does your offer get put? At the very bottom, right? Even in a hot market where homes go so fast, if you have to sell a home first before, then you've got to be put at the bottom. So you may have a client that can qualify to own both homes. They can qualify to the bank to own the home they're living in, plus they can own the home that they're trying to buy. They may not want to own both of those homes, and that they may be selling for that reason. But if that's the case, the sale is not contingent upon them selling the house. So then I would say you don't have to put this. You can put is not, even though they are selling a house. It's just they don't have to sell it in order to get that house. Anytime you can get around that, it's better. So we're going to say this client does not have to sell their house. All right. Next part that you guys are going to look at is possession. What does possession mean? Yeah, when the buyer gets keys and can actually move in. You look on here towards the top, it's going to say possession, recording. What does recording mean? Similar to closing is after closing, right? So once you close, there's funding and recording that has to happen. It can be same day or next day is usually how it is, unless you're on a weekend or holiday or something like that. But most of the time, if you close in the morning before 11, then you can get keys the same day. And if you close after 11, you can usually get keys by the next day at 3 or 4 is when it records. So then you just copy that and put it in here. What if the seller needs a lease back? You guys know what a lease back is? Where the seller says, okay, we can close on July 1st, but we need to still live in this home until August 1st because our next home's not going to be ready until then. So we need an extra month. There's two ways to do that, but I would say one gives you a lot more protection than the other. You could put that right here and say, the buyer is saying that you can live in there for 30 days after it records. Totally fine. Except there's a better way to do it that gives your buyer a lot more protection and a lot more clarity on some things. And that is the leaseback addendum, because in there it discloses, is there going to be a deposit? Is there going to be, who's going to pay for utilities? Things like that. If you just put 30 days, then it's kind of vague, and I don't know how the courts would decide who has to pay what. So I would say if it's more than a few days of recording that they're going to get possession, then I would put in a leaseback addendum. And you don't have to charge for it. You can say that they're doing it for free, but that way it still gives your buyer more protection. So, but in this case, it said recording. So we're going to do upon recording. As soon as it records, buyers have to move out. This is one of those that honestly, I had this happen. I'm going to give you another one of my bad examples. I was representing a seller who was also buying a home. We got under contract with both of those. For whatever reason, my brain did not work out the details that they were closing on one home. I don't remember the dates. They were closing on their sale 3 days before they closed on their purchase. And now we're halfway through the process, and I'm like, oh, so that means they have to move out of their house, go somewhere for 3 days, and then move in their next house. That's a pain, right? As you can imagine. And I was like, okay, no problem. I can either ask the seller of the house they're buying, hey, do you mind if we move in a little early? Or if we bump up closing a little early, 3 days, and then we'd be fine. Or I could ask the buyer of their place to say, hey, we need an extra 3 days to live in the home. Is that okay? Problem is, we're already under contract and earnest money is already non-refundable. And so our negotiating power is 0. And I was just hoping that one of the sides would help. And guess what? Perfect storm. The buyer was like, nope, I absolutely have to move in by this day. That's already in the contract. That's what I'm sticking with. Seller of the place that they were buying says, nope, we can't close any sooner than that. We need to close on that day. So now, guess what? I end up paying for a hotel for my client. I end up paying for moving trucks that they could keep for 3 days so that they could move their stuff into them. So this is my paying for my education, that I will absolutely never make that mistake again. But also at the same time, maintaining a good relationship with my clients that, hey, I made a mistake. I'll own up to it. I'll pay for it so you guys can feel as minimal damage as possible. And then I paid for them a gift card at La Jolla Groves, if you guys know of that. Awesome place in Provo. It's a nice fancy restaurant. So anyway, I did what I could to kind of recover, but never made that mistake again and never will, I hope. And I hope you guys never do either. If you're representing a seller, you've got to line up the dates from the start. It's always easier. Yes, sometimes people are kind and they can, okay, yeah, that's fine. You can do that. But a lot of times you're going to find that they're not. And it's not so much that they're not kind. It's just that they've lined things up already. They've got movers scheduled to come. They've got, they already told their landlord they're going to be out by a certain day. So like, it can be a big pain for them to change things after the fact. But if they know that ahead of time, 30 days before in the original offer, then usually a couple days isn't going to make a difference. So you want to find that out from the sellers as far as what they need for it. And if you guys think about it, it's probably best to give them a couple of days anyway, especially if you're the listing agent and representing a seller. I always say 7 days. I don't care what my client needs. I put it, unless they need more than that. But if they say, yeah, we can move out the day we close, I still try and ask for 7 days from any buyer, because delays happen, bad things happen. It's so much easier to move from one house to another when you have possession of both homes for at least a few days, where you don't have to get everything out all at once for sure and make sure it's cleaned. I just moved myself a week ago, and it's a process, guys. I know you guys know that. Yeah, great question. As the seller's agent, as the listing agent. So on here, when you're doing the form originally, it asks for possession. And on here, I'll put 7 days. And again, that's my thing. I'll put 7 days right here, possession. Pretty much, yeah. Unless again, my seller needs more time than that, then I can put that there. But otherwise, I just put 7 days. That way, when a buyer's agent's looking at this and saying, okay, what do they need for possession? Oh, 7 days, no big deal. I'll come in here, put in 7 days. No buyer is going to say, writing an offer, at that, I feel like it's not going to happen where they're going to say, sorry, I can't do that 7-day thing. And if they do, yeah, that was on the MLS listing. So this is the home that we're looking at. Yep. Exactly. A lot of agents will just put whatever their client needs. But here's the thing, you got to look at what the seller needs. And maybe you've already asked the seller, which we should have, right? Seller's agent, what they need for possession, for timing. But if not, you can always look here, and it might be blank. But if you're the seller's agent, when you're filling out the this MLS sheet, I would put, when it comes to possession, just put at least 7 days to give your client some time and some breathing room to move out. It's just one of those things that they may not know they need it, but when it gets there, most of the time they're thankful they had it. And they don't even know it was you that really did it, but it's a process. Yeah, it is a process. The worst part about moving is moving. So anyway, now if you are the seller's agent, let's say you receive an offer that says upon recording, and you're like, no, my client needs 7 days. What do? Yeah, you can counteroffer, right? That's an option. And again, when you're deciding the possession a month in advance and you're agreeing to terms, I feel like no buyer is going to cancel because of a 7-day possession. And if they are, then okay, you can figure it out. But most of the time they're not. It's when you're trying to get them to say, hey, I need an extra 4 days, and you're telling them that a week before, that's when things get really tough, that it's too hard for them at that point. So great questions. All right, moving on. Special assessments. What are those? What does it have to do with? Does every single home have potential for special assessments? Yeah. Could be. Most of the time, you're going to find special assessments when it has an HOA. It's not the HOA transfer fee. This is a separate thing, and you guys want to make sure you know this. Do whatever you guys feel comfortable with, whatever you'd like. I'll tell you what I do. I have my buyers put seller is responsible for special assessments. And then I have my buyers generally, unless it's a situation where I know we can get away with it, pay for the HOA transfer fee on their own. So this 4.3C HOA transfer fee, you can find that right here. It'll say HOA. And if it says yes, it'll say HOA transfer right below it, or I think it's on this side. And it'll either be a percentage of the sales price, like 0.5% of whatever the sales price is. At 400,000, I just happen to know that's $2,000. Or it'll say an actual dollar amount, $800. That's the transfer fee. That is a fee that needs to be paid at the closing of transfer of ownership in an HOA community. Every HOA has it. Some of them are very small. Some of them are a lot bigger. The state of Utah allows for up to 0.5% of the sales price is the maximum that an HOA can charge for that. And so you'll see that a lot of them do that. So who pays for that? This is where you decide. It could be the seller, it could be the buyer. Depends on how competitive you need to be and how you're writing up the offer. So that's the HOA transfer fee, the entity fees due upon change of ownership, right? That's 4.3C. 4.2 is different, special assessments. Who pays for that? Any idea what a special assessment is for an HOA community, or could give me an example of one? Let's say the HOA has not, for whatever reason, whether because they didn't do it right or because some unexpected expenses come up, and they need to replace the roofs in the community. It's going to cost $200,000, and in their reserves, they only have $100,000. Where are they going to get that extra money? Usually they'll charge an extra assessment. And this happened to my grandma. She lived in a senior retirement little community thing, and they had an HOA fee of $50 a month, and that exact thing happened. I don't know how they didn't know that they had to replace the roofs in 30 years. But when that time came, they said, hey, we don't have any money for this. We're charging everybody in this community an extra $200 a month for 6 months so that we can pay for the roof, right? It happens. It's not very often, but it does happen. So the question is, who's paying for this if an assessment comes up right now? And it's because it's so uncommon, I like to have the sellers pay for it. And also because it's an unexpected amount, I like to try and have the sellers pay for it out of their proceeds rather than my buyer coming up with extra cash to close. That's just, it could be a lot. You could do split equally between buyer and seller. We can do buyer. Generally, if the HOA transfer fee is really small, just have your buyer pay for it every time, because it's just one of those things that the seller doesn't have to worry about and that they can see that your buyer's doing what they can. If it's a big one, like 0.5% of the sales price, and your buyer just doesn't have the cash for it, then you may need to split equally between buyer and seller. But any questions on those? Okay. Next, the agent. Again, Sky Slopes fills this out for you if you use Sky Slopes. Otherwise, go to the thing, copy their name, paste it into here. And he's representing the seller. Then go to click on his name. Copy his number, his license number right there. Paste it in right here. And then you'll do the same thing with the seller's brokerage. You'll go to the brokerage, copy this, paste it in, click on the name, wait for it to load. Go to their license number 0. Is that a thing? That's weird. Never seen that before. But it'll have their license number there. You can copy it and paste it right there. They're representing the seller. You're representing the buyer and the buyer. Right? We don't use the limited agent thing. You do it if you are representing both the buyer and the seller, you do an unrepresented situation, which we'll save that for another time. Okay. Then the next thing that you'll want to fill out is right here. This is where your due diligence deadlines are. Are you going to waive your due diligence deadline for your buyer? Probably almost never. So it is contingent upon that. Appraisal. So what if your buyer has cash and there is no appraisal? Can you waive the appraisal? Yeah, totally can. And you should, because it makes your offer more attractive. What that means is, if there were to be an appraisal, which there wouldn't be if it's a cash offer, is just that no matter what the appraisal says, this is still going to be our purchase price, right? This is one of those things that it's really important for us agents to understand so well, to the point that we can explain it to our clients, because it can be a little confusing, but honestly, the thing that's going to make or break your offers is going to be this, the whole appraisal gap situation. Are you guys familiar with what the appraisal gap is? Have you talked about that? Yeah, what happens, and you're deciding this way up front, what happens if the appraisal comes in lower than what we're offering? We're offering $400,000. What if the appraisal comes in at $350,000? Here's what's going to happen. So it just outlines way in advance what will happen if the appraisal comes in low. If the appraisal does come in low, how much can your client pay on top of their closing costs, plus their minimum down payment required from their bank, depending on their loan? Could be 3%, could be 5%. Maybe they're doing 0%. If they're doing a USDA loan, maybe they're doing 20%. So it's not always the more down payment you have, the better. It's the more down payment in addition to the minimum down payment required for your loan. That's what's really setting you apart. Because you'll have a client that'll have a 20% down, so their down payment's going to be $100,000. And you'll be like, wow, that's way better than this client that's doing 3% down, that's only $6,000, or whatever the math is for that. Yeah, no, $12,000. Anyway, that's a big difference, right? But let's say your client that's doing 3% down has $20,000 to really put down on it. That means they can pay their minimum down payment required, which is $12,000, plus an additional $8,000 above the appraisal. And your client that's paying $100,000 because they need 20% down, they can't afford to go any higher. Which client is going to be more attractive? Yeah, the one with the 3% down payment, because they have an appraisal gap of $8,000. So you need to know the financials of your client well enough to say, you know, how much can you afford? How much do you have? You also need to know what loan program they're doing and get their closing costs estimate from their lender. Yep. Yeah, I would do this every time. Yeah, if you need to, type of thing, right? it used to, like, this is something new for me, probably for most agents. We've never used an appraisal gap before a year ago. But then every single deal we have has an appraisal gap, even if it's $1,000, that's $1,000 more that the seller walks away with than the other offers. Yeah, it's so much better because then you know how to strategize better. You have calculated, okay, my client, I know they have 30 grand total to put towards the house. That's usually how I'll phrase it to my clients. Some of that's going to be to your closing costs, some of that's going to be to your down payment. But if I know they've got 30,000 and then the lender told me they have their closing costs are estimated to be 7,000, that means I've got $23,000 to work with. And if their minimum down payment required is $12,000, I know I can do an appraisal gap of $11,000, and I'd use every single penny in this, because it's possible that the appraisal does come in at value or closer to $11,000 off. And then my client doesn't have to use all of that money towards it, but I know that they could if they needed to. Yeah. Yep. The VA loans, sometimes they're even zero. Yeah, the question is how often do they put 20% down to avoid mortgage insurance? I don't have the data. I probably could look it up because it'd be interesting. Yeah, from my experience, I would estimate that maybe 20% of my clients usually do 20% down. It's not very often. And it more has to do with what types of clients you're working with. If you're working with first-time home buyers more often, it's hardly ever going to happen. I think I've only had two first-time home buyers in my whole career that have had 20% to put down. Most people get their down payment from the equity they have in their house if it's a larger amount, right? So usually the ones that are doing 20% down get that money from their sale. Yep. Yeah, great question. But I like to tell my clients that too, because there are certain financial gurus out there that are great that always say, do not buy a house unless you have 20% down. To me, I think that's a huge mistake, because my question to my clients whenever they have that kind of thing is, how long is it going to take you to come up with 20%? Oh, 2 years. Okay, great. And how much in home values have they gone up? Let's just say in the past 2 years. Oh, way more than 20%. Like it's going to be a lot harder. So they could make more off of their equity than the time it takes for them to save up for that money. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's just better for people. You can totally use that. I'd strongly encourage you to, right? Like, how long is it going to take you to save up 20%? And how much have home values gone up? That's money you're missing out on. So it's not just that home values have gone up 100 grand. It's the opportunity cost too, right? Like, so it's even more than 100 grand that they'd be missing out on because they have been waiting. So if someone's planning to buy a house, my advice, and it does depend on their situation, there's a few other questions you need to ask, but in general, the sooner the better. Don't even pay attention to interest rates. Buy a home as soon as you can, as soon as you can get into one, because the equity has shown that it's going to go up, the appreciation of the home. So they make money off of that. If interest rates go down later on, what can they do? They can refinance. So it's not like. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I literally. Yep. And I had this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because if you wait for rates to go down, how long could you be waiting for? Nobody knows, but it could be a long time. Could be 5 years, could be 1 year. We don't know. But that's a risk that you're taking when all you have to do is refinance. And no, it's not free, but it's what, $5,000 maybe to refinance or something. Yeah, that's true. It could be free, or at least wrapped into the loan. So anyway, that's that's a little bit off on a tangent, but that's really good. Like the appraisal, it's really important for you guys to understand it. Honestly, one of the best teachers is YouTube. I watch the heck out of YouTube, especially towards the beginning when what does the appraisal mean? And make sure I really understand what it means, how it affects a buyer. because the more you know about that kind of thing, the better, like Jesse said, the better you as an agent can help your client stand out. Because if you're going up against these other offers that maybe they don't know that their client could have done a $20,000 appraisal gap because they didn't do their homework, but you know that yours can, and maybe yours is only 5,000, but you put that and you can get it because of that. So makes a big difference. All right. Going on to the next part. All right. This one is really used now. Used to not be used hardly ever. So we have financing condition, right? Does your buyer need a loan or not? No means they've got cash. They don't need to get a loan. B means, yes, they do need to get a loan. If you're going up against an offer with cash, you can still potentially beat it depending on your other terms. So don't be so afraid of going up against offers with cash. But here's where you make your earnest money non-refundable after the due diligence deadline. So we have $5,000 of earnest money that we're putting towards it, right? Normally that money's refundable up until the financing and appraisal deadline, which will happen later. We'll determine those dates in a minute. But if you put right here $5,000, this means as soon as the due diligence period is over, if my buyer cancels for any reason, it could be financing reason, it could be because it doesn't appraise. So you have to be careful with this. My buyer cancels for any reason, your seller will keep my $5,000, right? So it's a risk, but this is one of those pieces that is crucial because almost every offer that's being accepted, or at least in the past year, has had this on it. So if you don't have this on it, then you're not being as competitive as you could be. And again, maybe you don't need to be, depends on the situation, right? If it's a home that just got listed and there's been a lot of showings, then you probably need to be putting something here. If it's a home that's been on market for a month, maybe you don't. So you got to be wise and get familiar with that. But that's where you put it. You don't have to do the full thing. You could say 2,500. You could say that if after the due diligence deadline, which will be 3 days from now, if my client cancels for any reason, it'll be $2,500. The reason this is a risk, though, the biggest mistake that you have to be careful of is the appraisal. Because let's say you have an appraisal gap. And I know I'm getting complicated, but this matters. You've got to understand this stuff. Your offer is for $400,000. Let's say that you have an appraisal gap of $10,000, meaning if the appraisal comes in at $390,000, that seller's still getting their $400,000 like you promised. If the appraisal comes back at $380,000, but you have this says, I don't care what the appraisal comes back at. If you cancel, then we keep $2,500. And so let's say, well, we could do $390,000 now because we can do 10 over. Now you're kind of in a pinch. So I'll tell you something that I do in a minute to try and help avoid this. And we didn't add this on here, but anyway, so that's why you have to be careful with this one. But that's what this means. If you want your earnest money to go non-refundable or a portion of it after the due diligence deadline, as opposed to the financing and appraisal deadline, this is where you state that. Additional earnest money, I've literally never, ever used this or seen this used. You're gonna have to talk to somebody else to understand why and when this happens, but that's not gonna be me. So I put will not. You put your earnest money at the beginning of the deal at the first 4 days. I don't think you need to put any earnest money later. Maybe you do, I don't know. Addenda. Okay, this is where you state what addenda is included with your offer. You want to be careful. You got a addendum number 1, and then we're going to put other, and I'll add this in a minute, but we're going to talk about the appraisal gap later on. And I think that has addendum on it as well. So we'll call that addendum 2. If they're doing a FHA loan or a VA loan, this is where you'd put that as well. Home warranty. You guys know what a home warranty is? You've been taught this one? Not so much. There's a bunch of different home warranty companies. They're very common to come around to team meetings and things like that, provide lunch, and there's great ones out there. But basically the home warranty covers a whole bunch of different appliances that if they go out, they send somebody to either repair them or to replace it within the first 12 months of a buyer owning the home. I always love to have my clients have this as much as possible. I like to still have a seller pay for it. You can look at different plans and pricing to get familiar with how much they normally cost, but somewhere around really between $400 and $600 is what they cost. And so here's where you say a home warranty is included with this transaction. The buyer will order it, which is going to be either you or your transaction coordinator usually. The buyer will select the company, which will be you or your transaction coordinator, getting the approval of your client first, right? Saying, hey, these are some of the companies I've worked with. Do you care which one you choose? Most clients are going to say no. Then you choose for them. And who is going to pay for it? How much is it? $500, let's say. And who's going to pay for it? If the buyer is, then really there's no purpose in putting this on here at all. But if the seller is going to pay for it, then that's when you state that. So this is one of those terms that this is part of the seller's closing costs. It's $500 they're going to have to pay for your client. So you may want to just not have them pay for this. And you can talk to your client and say, and explain what it is and say, you could buy it on your own, or we could try and ask the seller to pay for it. Again, knowing the market, knowing the home, you might ask for it, you might not. Okay, down to mediation. Again, this is what I do. I don't know about everyone else. I like to have it may at the option of the parties, just because if they have a disagreement and then they're forced to go to mediation, I feel like a lot of times the mediation isn't going to work out because they're already not agreeing. And so they're going to have to go to court. So it's just a waste of money. So I just like to put may at the option of the parties. And then lastly, we got the dates. So I usually start from the bottom and work my way up. I know that today's June 3rd. If I'm offering today, it's usually 4 weeks, and I'll check with the lender. You've got to check with your lenders to know that they can close on time. If you want to be competitive, you might want to put 3 weeks, but you have to check with your lender first, because you don't want to put your client in a position where they're supposed to close on time and they couldn't because you had a date that's too soon, and your lender can't make that happen. And now you've got to ask for an extension, which now you're at the mercy of the sellers. So you want to make sure it's proper. If you're going to do 3 weeks, get the approval from your buyer's lender first. Otherwise, I'd usually just do 4 weeks or right around 4 weeks. So we'll do July 1st. Although when it's on a deadline by a month, I'll usually do the day before, because just like $199 is 1,000 times better than $2. The end of June is better for a seller sooner than July 1st, right? So I'll put that. So it's still June. Financing and appraisal deadline. Usually I'll still do 3 weeks on this one, because you want to make sure there's enough time for the appraiser to get out there and do what he needs to do. So I'd put the 24th. And then the due diligence. Let's say that this home is a popular one. It just hit the market. It's only been on the market for 2 days. You know there are going to be other offers, or you've called the listing agent. They said there's 5 other offers. You've got to be competitive. This is where I would say, okay, today's Friday. If they accept this by tomorrow, and you got to know when they're going to accept the offer, then I want to give my client 2 days to check out the home. So maybe I'll put the 7th. And that's a pretty short deadline. They got to get a home inspector out there and everything in that short time, which you usually can. There's a lot of home inspection companies out there, so you can usually get somebody next day if you need to. And then the seller's disclosures, I always have that before the due diligence deadline. So I'll just put that the day before. That way my client gets that seller's disclosures before they have their due diligence deadline. And then offer time and acceptance. So again, this is the one where you've got to ask the seller. I've had it happen where I'm the listing agent and I got an offer at 7 p.m. and they had on a Saturday, and they had the acceptance deadline of 10 a.m. the next morning on a Sunday. And in our notes, we had already said, we'll be reviewing offers over the weekend. Any offers received over the weekend will be reviewed on the following business day, which would be Monday. And they did that anyway. Some agents have what I think is a misconception that if they can put a little pressure on you and have you hurry and accept it, that's a good thing and that works. But in my experience, it's been the opposite. It usually turns people off a little bit if you give them that quick of a turnaround, right? It's not going to make a difference for you really if you put by Monday at 5 or something like that. You don't want to go too long. But if today's Saturday night, then yeah, I'd call the seller's agent and say, what do you guys need for acceptance deadline? And ask them that. And then if it's 5 o'clock on Monday, great. I'll put 5 o'clock on Monday. Do whatever you whatever you say. So what happens if you put tomorrow at 10 a.m. and then they don't respond to it till Monday? Is the offer dead? You have to write a whole new offer again? What do? Let's say the seller now wants to accept it, but it's too late. Yeah, write a counter offer is what they would officially be, because you're not under contract yet, but it would be through an addendum. Yeah, it's counter offer, and then it would just say something like buyer and seller agree to all the terms in previous thing, or you could say acceptance deadline for original contract to be Monday at 5 p.m. Exactly. Yeah, that's the biggest difference is now the seller signed it. Okay, great, but it's still not under contract till both parties sign everything, and then you're finally good once the buyer signs it and you send it back. So sweet. That's what you'll fill out, and then you can print it. Now, we've talked about this a lot. Hopefully this has been helpful. I'm not done yet. We're almost done. We've got 20 minutes left. We didn't get through all the slides that we needed to go through, but do you feel like this has been helpful to go through? I hope so. Okay. Do you guys want to take a quick break? I know I had promised a break and then I went into this and it took a lot longer than I expected. Or should we just power through? All right. You guys are awesome. Okay. Next form. So this is the addendum or the counteroffer, depending on how you phrase it. Addendum number 1. This is a counteroffer, or no, we'll call it an addendum because we're representing the buyer. You put the same date you put earlier, you put the same buyer, put the same seller, put the same address. On this one, I would put the full address with the city, state, and zip code on it, just because it doesn't have a spot for that. So just to be clear. All right. Dean will tell you to use these forms as much as you can. Like if there's a form on here already made, then you should use that. Otherwise, you can type in whatever you want. Seller, I don't know. I guess I won't make something up, but you can put in whatever you want that's different from the previous contract. Anything that's in the original contract that you want to change goes right here in this addendum. I want to pull up the appraisal gap because we talked about that for a minute, and I think that's one of the most useful things you guys could be familiar with. There is a little snippet of the appraisal gap in that addendum, but this one's the more full thing, and I like this one a lot better. Okay, so appraisal addendum, let's say it's 1. This is an addendum. You put in that same information every time. All right, here we go. Appraisal guarantee. In the event that the property appraises for less than the purchase price, so we're going to keep our example. We're offering $400,000. That's the purchase price. If it appraises for less, but equal to or more than this number, the appraisal floor. So if my client has $11,000 in addition to their closing costs, in addition to their minimum down payment required, that's their appraisal gap. So then I do the math. $400,000 minus 11 is $389. So that's where I'll put. That means that my appraisal gap is $11,000, right? Buyer agrees and the purchase price shall not be reduced and buyer shall pay. So if the appraisal comes in at $395, what does this mean? What's going to be the purchase price? So we offered 400,000 and we have an appraisal gap, meaning if it appraises for anything less than the purchase price, but more than 389, we'll still pay 400,000. So if it appraises for 395, we're going to pay 400,000. That's what we told them, right? So this doesn't mean that it's 11,000 in addition to the appraisal. This just means that that's the gap up to the amount. Yeah, up to the amount that we've already offered, up to $400,000. Okay. If you want to offer 405, you could do that. But then and I would say in between, right? In between this number and the purchase price, if the appraisal comes in between those at all, we're going to offer 400,000. That's what we're going to do. Cash. Yep, exactly. Yep. So worst case scenario, if the appraisal comes in exactly at 389, I know my buyer can afford to pay his minimum down payment required, 3%, plus his closing costs, plus this $11,000 more that he's going to have to pay now. Nope. That's the biggest change lately. A year ago prior, it was like, hey, appraisal came in low. What can your buyer do? Oh, he can do $5,000 more. Seller, you can reduce your price by 5,000, and now we meet in the middle. Now what we're doing is we are saying well in advance, before it even happens, if the appraisal comes in low, how are we going to navigate that? What's that going to look like? And both buyer and seller have to agree on this before it even happens. So it's risky. It's tough. But that's the reality. That's what we have going on with us. Exactly. So I had a client that had $70,000 that he could have put down in addition to his 20%. And he's like, yeah, whatever it takes. So we put our appraisal gap of that much. And of course we got it because, and then the appraisal only came in like $15,000 shy. So he only ended up having to use 15,000 of that instead of the full 70. But it was attractive to the seller because the seller's like, oh, what if our home only appraises for 300,000 and not 400? Like, okay, that's the offer is going to be the best one, right? So yeah, it's kind of a mind game sometimes. Okay. Yes. It can. So yeah, great question. What if it comes in below 389? What I like to do to give the sellers confidence that my buyer's in a good spot, or I guess it just depends. I like to tell them in advance what we can do at that point. And right here, what I would write is buyer and seller agree in additional terms. In fact, I'm going to pull it up because guess what? Surprise, surprise. I have this pre-written for myself in my notes that I can just copy and paste. So I have my little thing. And you guys know a lot of Dean's forms. If you go to kwwestfield.com and you go to blog, Dean has some of these pre-written stuff and I would use them. And I think he even has one for the appraisal gap, but somewhere in here. But anyway, there's some forms in here that you guys can use, like asking for closing costs and that kind of thing. But I have mine pre-written in my notes. So what I'll do in my notes is I'll copy it, paste it right into here, but I'm using two different computers. So I'll read to you what I have. Basically, yeah, okay. I changed it, so that's why I'm confused. All right, I won't read to you what I have. I thought I had it written down. But basically, I just say buyer and seller agree that if purchase price comes in below 389, buyer to pay $11,000 above that appraised value. That way, if it comes in at 385, the seller still has confidence that, okay, I'm still getting at least 396 for this because it's $11,000 in addition to that. I think the fear that some, and you just have to be careful because you got to ask the seller's agent, the fear that they could have is, what if it comes in for $300,000 and the seller decides they don't want to sell it anymore, but now they've agreed that, oh, it's $11,000 more. So now they're only getting 311, right? So it could go both ways. And you just got to ask the listing agent, if I put this, would that help your seller feel more comfortable if the appraisal comes in lower? And if it does, then great, you can put it. If it doesn't, then maybe leave it off and you renegotiate at that point. But remember, your earnest money may be non-refundable if you've put that. Yep, this is just a protection if it comes in lower. If the appraisal comes in at 410, you're still paying 400. And the seller doesn't even have to know. It's not their appraisal. It's your appraisal as the buyer that you're paying for. And so that's your information. And you can choose to share that with them or you can choose not to. And I would say if it ever comes in higher, I just always tell the seller, yep, appraisal came in at value, so we're good. Mhm. Yeah. Just this, I'll finish typing this out, just what I put in my additional terms. So I have to write it out. Let me write it out and then I'll get this. Yeah, buyer and seller. Okay. So for those that can't see it, so I just say something like buyer and seller agree that if appraisal comes in below 389, then purchase price will be $11,000 higher than appraised value. That seems pretty clear to me. No, you don't have to do new rep C if that does happen, but I would want to clarify that in a separate addendum saying purchase price to be 396 now. That way, title company, lenders, all they see is that. They don't have to see all this stuff because the appraisal is not attached to the contract. And so it's a separate document. And so just by having this on here, if you don't clarify the price later on, the title company, I guess the lender would know because they're the ones doing it, but it's not their job to know what the appraisal came in at, if that makes sense. So I would put, once the appraisal comes back, I would say to the seller, I would share the appraisal with them and say, hey, this is what the appraised value came in at, 385. So our new price is going to be 396. I'll write an addendum clarifying that. And then you send it over. And they've already said they would, so there's no reason that they should say no at this point. I would argue that they can't, but I guess I don't know. Because they've got it here saying that they would. And you've got a clear appraisal. So I don't know. I can't answer that. I've never had that happen before. Because when I've done this, it's been like, okay, yeah, we said we would. We'll do it. Oh, yeah. I've never had it where we had this and then after the fact they said, no, never mind, that's too low. We're not doing that. I don't know what would happen in that situation. But yeah, that's my feeling because they have agreed to it right here. As long as you say buyer and seller agree, that's why I have to put that. Dean told me that. If you just exclude that part and just say, if appraisal comes in low, they could argue that we never agreed to that. I don't know how that works, but Dean told me that. So I'm like, all right, if buyer and seller agree, or sorry, if buyer and seller agree that if appraisal comes in low. So anyway, kind of weird. All right. I'll go over the buyer broker agreement and then we'll be done. I'll just go over it quickly because I don't spend a whole lot of time on this. Everyone has different approaches on when to get this signed. We're supposed to have this signed if you're doing like real estate work for a client. If there's belief that they're working with you, then you should have this signed. Oftentimes it happens when we went and saw a home, they want to write an offer. And with their very first offer, I include the buyer broker agreement. The worst thing you could do though is not tell them what this is and just have them sign it because it may happen and they could sign it and you sneak it in there. And then later on, they're like, wait, what? I didn't know I signed that. So you want to explain what this is. And I always do, except for one time, which is why ever since then, I always do. So you put their buyer name. We had Joe, right? Then the term of the agreement, it's automatically got my name on there. This is when the agreement ends. So a lot of people like to do 6 months. That's pretty common. So you put 6 months from now. In what county? You put any? Oh, really? Someone told you that? I've never heard that before. That is awesome. It's even better than Utah or Salt Lake or whatever. In any county in Utah. Oh, nice. See, you guys are teaching me. Or a specific address. I had one client that he bought a lot of property with his business, and he didn't want us to get paid for every transaction because I was only working with him personally, not with his business. So to be clear and to make him feel comfortable, I made a new buyer broker agreement for every single offer he put in, which is only a few, and then I put the actual address of the property he was offering on. So that way, if he buys that property, we get paid. Otherwise, we don't. Then you've got the brokerage fee. So the way I explain this is I bring this out to my client and say, I kind of tell them, like, I can go through as much detail of this as you'd like, but this is basically what it is saying that if you buy a property in any county in Utah, that our brokerage will be due a commission generally paid for by the seller of whatever property it is. And if it's not, I'll let you know. That's usually how I explain it. So I'll just put 3% because that's the fee up to that amount. And then the protection period, for those that want more detail and they're like, what is the protection period? I'll tell them the protection period basically says that after our agreement is over in 6 months from now, if you want to offer on a property that you and I had already seen or that we had looked at together, then we're still due a commission from them because that's something that we did during our agreement. So for 3 more months after that. Then I talked to him about the duties of a limited agent. Even though officially we aren't going to be limited agents, it would probably be an unrepresented if you represent a seller and a buyer that is going to buy the same property. Then it would be duties of a limited agent. So at this point, I just let them know if it so happens that I have a seller that is selling a home that fits your needs perfectly, there may be some of my duties that may be limited. Like I can't be completely honest with you and telling you how low they'd be willing to go while still honoring them. And so I'm kind of tied in some ways. But I do tell them at that point, but sometimes that works out really well. And it's a win-win-win. It's a win for you. It's a win for the seller. It's a win for me. So I kind of give them a heads up that could happen. And then if it happens, I give them more detail on how that works. Professional advice, I just say that I am a realtor, but I am not a surveyor. I am not a lender. I'm not a title officer. So I'm not a lawyer. So any of that, although I have experience with a lot of these things and can give you and can point you in the right direction, just know that if you need specific advice on this, you'll need to talk to a professional in that field. And then there's no other attachment. Equal housing opportunities. One thing that it does talk about in the slides that I wanted to bring up, you guys heard of the love letters? Have you been told about those? What to do, what not to do? Oh, sweet. So just the other day. Yeah, they used to be more common. They're not as common anymore. It's where a buyer, in addition to their offer, sends in a letter to the seller saying, our family is beautiful and we love your home because you decorated it so nicely and whatever. I used to use those, advise those from my clients quite a bit. And I felt like they did work a lot of times. But the reality is it can be very easy for a seller to choose you because of your background or your beliefs or your color of your skin. And so because of that, it presents an opportunity for them to discriminate. And you don't want to put your seller in a position to do that. So for my sellers, what I'll tell them is these may happen, but it may put you in a position where you feel like that. If I get any letters like that, would you like to see them or would you like me to just keep them? And then you can just focus on the financials. After explaining that, I've never had a seller like, no, I'd still like to see them. You know, they'd always be like, no, you can just keep those. Like, okay, great. That way it just protects them. Yeah, exactly. Maybe I haven't heard that, but maybe they have said that. Very well could be. I don't anymore. I used to, but then when I started seeing this and I started to see it happened with my uncle, where he was just like, he was going to be moving just a block away from the house that he had. And so he's like, oh, I just want a really good family with kids that are my age, you know, and that's what the trigger for me. And I was like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. So from that point forward, I've just been like, yeah, let's just have you stick to the financials. And really that's all that should matter to you. You're leaving anyway. So anyway, I don't advise those for my clients anymore just because I don't want to put anyone in that position. And I just don't feel like it makes enough of a difference because so many agents now are aware of the problem that it has caused. And I feel like they don't get presented very often, if at all anymore anyway. So it's just a waste of time. Okay. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, I don't, you guys can do your business however you feel. Again, this is something that I personally like to do. I've never charged any of my buyers ever if the seller is not giving us a good commission. And it has happened a couple of times. I think if it happened more often, I may have to do that. My feeling is I want my buyer to have such a good experience that they want to use me again. And I don't want to leave them feeling like, man, sellers always pay for commissions and now I had to pay him for commission. That doesn't make any sense. I don't want them not coming back. So I had a friend of mine, and he doesn't even know it, that I got paid $500 was the commission for this house that he was on. And that was 2 years ago. And he just called me a week ago and said, hey, I'm about ready to sell. And so now I'm finally like, okay, now I can finally cash in on something, right? But that's just my mentality. I don't like to do that. So when I'm going over the buyer broker, I actually say, I will never charge you commission. And if it starts to become a problem, then I'll change how I say it. But that's what I say. So that way it gives them confidence. They are going to be working with me. They work with a professional. They're not going to have to pay for it. The seller of whatever home they choose to buy is going to pay our commission. And that's that. Yeah, when I'm talking to buy buyers. Yep. Sellers, it's a different conversation. Mhm. Okay. Yes. Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. And you could do that. Again, you do like whatever you guys are comfortable with. Yeah. Because it's not super common to run into that. Yeah. But I think the way to avoid it is, yeah, if you have that conversation up front before you write an offer on a home, because then then you can tell them at least, like, if it does happen where they're not offering a commission, I can let you know. And that way, when your client falls in love with that home and they're offering $500 and you feel like, hey, I've put a lot of work into this, I don't want you guys feeling like you're being unappreciated and devalued. Yeah, you could do something like that, because the reality is, where does that money come from? If that's the case, it comes from the buyer's closing costs. So in addition to their down payment and their $11,000 appraisal gap, they've got to pay you now. So yeah, that's why I just avoid it altogether. I know other agents, even in this office, have said otherwise, and that's totally fine. So that's why I just want to share my perspective and what I do, and then you guys figure out whatever you feel comfortable with and what's right for you, and go for it. So, yeah, how many deals have I done that's happened? I think twice is what's coming to mind. One was 500 and one was 2,500, so it wasn't zero, but it's never been zero. Everything else has been at least 1.5%, which is still feels a little low, but I would say the majority. A couple of them have been builders, but no, there's been a couple, like certain brokerages that are more prone to giving that advice to their clients that do that, but it's just not very common. That's why I continue to do things the way I've done them, is just because it seems to work. It doesn't seem to be a problem for me enough to where that really has made a difference. But again, if that starts to change, which, 2 years ago, the most common buyer's agent commission was 3%. And I feel like today it's probably maybe 50% of them, or 2.5, something like that. And so it is becoming, but our home prices have gone up too. So like the commissions are a little higher. So I don't know. I think if it becomes more of a problem, then I probably would do that more often. But it's just tough in this market, because if your client has to pay you and they have to pay their closing costs and be competitive and win an offer, it's like, that just may not happen. So anyway, I will say lastly, 2 things. Number one, when you're representing a seller, you want to have some sort of a system to where you can show your sellers the different offers, especially if you get multiple offers. I have a spreadsheet that I've made that I know there's a form on command that you could use that puts in the offers, and it just shows them. Like my spreadsheet will just show them this is how much, this is what they're offering. This is what they're asking you to pay for. This is what they're paying for. This is your bottom line. That way it's so easy for them to compare this offer against that one. Because even though one of them may appear to be a better price because it doesn't have an appraisal gap, maybe it's not such a good deal. You know, they're just trying to get your hopes up. So you might want to avoid it from that. So have some sort of template that you can use to show your sellers when you get multiple offers, so that it's very easy for them to identify which one is better than another. And then, can't remember the other thing. Maybe it's just that. All right, maybe we'll be done. Any ahas, any other questions? Do you feel a little more confident in writing offers and what you need to do? We didn't talk about receiving them a lot, but I think as we went through it, we did talk about that in different places. Yeah. And become familiar with it. Study it, read it. There are some agents that know exactly what 4.2a says. I am not that, but I'm very familiar with it enough to know what's in each paragraph if I see it. So study it enough so that you guys can give your advice to clients. And I would say the best way to do that is to practice on somebody that's not familiar with it. Maybe if you have a spouse or, you know, friend that's close, that you can say, hey, that has not seen this before or that's not familiar with it, and you can explain it to them in a way that they understand, and rehearse that and practice it. You want it to come easy, you want it to come quick, and it builds rapport for yourself when your clients are asking you, well, what does dispute resolution mean? And you don't have to sit there thinking like, well, let me read that real quick and then I'll tell you, right? Like you already know what that means and you can explain it to them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. And that reminded me of the other thing I was going to say. Pay attention to the market though, because it is shifting. And 6 months ago, I feel like you cannot win an offer unless you have an appraisal gap. Riley, would you agree? Today, I have had offers accepted that don't have an appraisal gap, but it's not every time. Some homes still require that, some don't. So you've got to do your due diligence, talk to the listing agents, see what you can find out, be involved with other agents here in the office, because I mean, it's not everybody does every deal. And so sometimes the best way to find out what's really going on is to talk to other agents that are having listings. Because truthfully, for me, there was a while there where I felt like, I don't know if we really need to do all this extra work. And I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, I have a townhome in Vineyard that went under contract in 3 days. Guess how many offers we got on it? 1 offer. But we had it listed for $489. But because that 1 offer came so quickly within the first 3 days, they assumed there were multiple offers and they had to be more competitive. What we did, their offer was $489 cash. We actually countered them at $500,000 and they accepted. But they have no idea we only had 1 offer. And so the fact that that I was able to see that on the receiving end shows me that, okay, this is not 6 months ago, at least, that because 6 months ago we did that, we would have gotten at least 5 offers. So just be paying attention to the market, because you want to give proper advice to your clients without them losing every single time, but also not having to do, overpay for things or pay for things they don't need to pay for if you can get a seller can. So it's kind of a fine line that you've got to navigate, but we are shifting. That's been true for at least a month and a half now. So cool. Any other questions or ahas? Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming. That's it.